It was an ordinary spring morning in Wilmington, Delaware, but for Emily Williams, the day held a sense of foreboding. The air was thick with the weight of a decision that had irrevocably changed the course of her life. Emily stood at the edge of the hospital bed, gazing down at her husband, Lucas, who was hooked up to a web of machines. His breathing was steady now, thanks to her. The doctors had told her that his liver was failing, that without a transplant, he would not survive. The news had struck Emily like a bolt of lightning, but the thought of losing him had paralyzed her. She loved him more than anything. Lucas had been her childhood sweetheart, her partner through thick and thin. And so, when the doctor said he needed a liver, Emily didn't hesitate. She was a match and she knew the risks. She had spent weeks in recovery, her body healing from the major surgery. It had been painful, but the thought of Lucas getting better made it all bearable. They had always said they'd be there for each other, no matter what. Now it felt like they were more connected than ever, both physically and emotionally. But as Emily stood there watching him sleep, she couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. A lingering doubt gnawed at her, a suspicion she had brushed off in the past. "Lucas, are you okay?" she whispered, her hand resting lightly on his. His chest rose and fell gently, and she found herself thinking of how their life together had been perfect until recently. The past few months had been difficult. Lucas had seemed distant, distracted. He was still in recovery, but there was something more to it. Emily didn't want to admit it to herself, but the signs were there. His late nights at work, his distracted phone calls, the unexplained absences. But she brushed it all aside, convinced that their love was strong enough to weather anything. Now standing here, a feeling of dread settled deep within her. What if her sacrifice hadn't just been a gift of life? What if it had made her blind to something darker, something that was brewing in the shadows? Emily turned away from the bed and went to the window, her fingers tracing the cool glass. Outside, the world seemed to go on as usual. People were rushing by, oblivious to the storm that was about to erupt in her life. She had given Lucas the ultimate gift, but what if that gift had been used to manipulate her, to trap her in a lie she hadn't yet seen? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on Lucas's recovery. He would be fine. He had to be. She had given him everything, her health, her time, her love. The least he could do was love her back with the same intensity. But that doubt lingered, gnawing at her, as if the universe was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She reached for it without thinking, her heart sinking when she saw the name on the screen. It was Lucas. She hadn't expected him to be awake yet. She answered quickly. "Hey, babe, how are you feeling?" Emily asked, her voice soft. "I'm fine, just a little tired," Lucas replied. His voice sounded distant, more so than usual. "But listen, there's something I need to tell you. It's important." Emily's stomach twisted. "What is it, Lucas?" "You're worrying me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Lucas spoke again, his voice lower than before. "I've been seeing someone else." The words hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She felt the blood drain from her face, her knees growing weak beneath her. "What? No. No, Lucas, this isn't funny. I'm serious," Lucas said, his voice distant. "I didn't want to hurt you, but it's been going on for a while now. I never meant for it to happen, but I can't deny it anymore. I've been seeing someone. I'm sorry, Emily." The room seemed to spin as the words reverberated in her ears. Emily dropped the phone, her hands shaking violently. She stumbled back toward Lucas's bed, feeling a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. How could this be happening? She had just saved his life, given him a piece of her own, and this was how he repaid her? She felt the hot sting of tears welling up in her eyes. Betrayal, like an ugly shadow, wrapped around her heart. Her mind raced as she tried to comprehend what Lucas had just confessed. He had been unfaithful, even after everything she had done for him. She had given him the one thing she could never get back, and he had turned it into a weapon to destroy their marriage. Emily stepped back, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The world around her seemed to fade into the background. How could she have been so blind? She had trusted him. She had loved him with every ounce of her being, and this was what he had done with that trust. her hands balled into fists, trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. She had no idea how to process this information, how to reconcile the man she had loved for so long with the stranger who had just shattered her world. But one thing was certain now. Lucas's betrayal had set something in motion, a chain of events that would change everything. Emily didn't know yet what she was capable of, what depths of darkness this betrayal would bring out in her. But she would soon find out. As she stood there, staring at Lucas's sleeping form, she made a vow to herself. She would make him pay for this. He would regret every moment of this affair, and she would make sure he never forgot the price of betrayal. The days that followed Lucas's confession were like a blur. Emily moved through her house like a ghost, her mind consumed by the betrayal. She couldn't bring herself to look at him the same way anymore. Each time she saw him, she remembered his cold words on the phone, the way he had confessed without an ounce of remorse. His betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound, and no matter how much she tried to focus on his recovery, the truth gnawed at her insides. She couldn't understand it. How could he do this to her? How could he betray her after everything? She had given him her liver. She had endured the pain of the surgery, the recovery, the risks of such an intimate and life-altering decision, all for him. And this is what he did with her sacrifice. That thought haunted her. But Emily wasn't someone who crumbled easily. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being able to handle whatever life threw at her. This betrayal, though, felt like a different kind of attack. It wasn't just her marriage that had been shattered, it was her very sense of self. For days she remained silent, trying to process her emotions and come to terms with what had happened. But the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Then came the moment of clarity. One evening, when the sun was setting and the house was eerily quiet, Emily found herself sitting in front of the computer in the study. She wasn't sure what compelled her to do it, but she knew she had to. She logged into Lucas's email account. She had done it before, years ago, when they had first started dating. There had been an issue with a missing flight ticket, and Lucas had left his email open on the computer. Back then, the intrusion had felt innocent enough, a simple misunderstanding. But now she had a very different reason for checking. She found the email trail quickly, messages from an unknown sender, a name that didn't ring any bells. The subject lines alone made her stomach turn. "Can't wait to see you again," one said. "Last night was amazing," said another. It was all there. Every word, every lie, every promise that Lucas had made to this other woman. Her hands shook as she clicked through the emails, each one revealing a more intimate relationship than she had ever imagined. They weren't just texts or casual conversations. These were declarations of love, plans for secret rendezvous, and romantic getaways. He had been planning an entire life with this woman behind her back. Emily's world was crumbling piece by piece. The feeling of betrayal surged again, hot and furious. This wasn't just a one-night mistake. This was an affair, one that had gone on for months, maybe longer. And the worst part? She had no idea. She had been completely in the dark, focused only on caring for him while he was sick. She had never thought to look deeper, to question his late nights or the secrecy around his phone. Now she understood why. As Emily scrolled through the emails, she couldn't help but notice the tone of the messages. The other woman, her name was Sarah, was clearly infatuated with Lucas. She referred to him with terms of endearment, and the messages were laced with excitement about future plans. But there was one email that stood out from the rest. It was from Lucas to Sarah, sent just a few days ago, before Emily's surgery. In it, Lucas wrote, "I don't know what I'd do without you. Emily's recovery is going well, but once she's better, we'll have to figure out how to handle things. I can't leave her just yet, but I'll find a way to be with you. I promise." The words were like a slap in the face. Emily could barely breathe as she read and reread the sentence. He had been planning on leaving her. He had been preparing for a future with someone else, even while she had been lying in a hospital bed, recovering from the surgery that saved his life. Suddenly, everything felt like a lie. All those moments of tenderness, those late-night conversations, those little things that she had taken as signs of affection, it had all been a facade. She had been nothing more than a placeholder in Lucas's life, someone to keep around until he could fully escape. A rush of emotions flooded through her: anger, sorrow, betrayal, confusion. The man she had trusted, the man she had given everything to, had been playing her for a fool. But more than anything, Emily felt a burning need for retribution. She needed to make him understand the consequences of what he had done. She stared at the screen for a long time, as though the words were going to change if she just looked at them long enough. But they didn't. The truth was undeniable. Lucas had deceived her, and now she would make him pay for it. The next morning, Lucas was still recovering at home, his body weak from the transplant surgery, but he was getting better. He was up and about, though he moved slowly. Emily could see the way he still favored his side, where the surgery had been performed. His eyes lacked the spark they once had. The guilt was written all over him, though he hadn't yet realized that Emily had discovered the truth. Emily had decided to play her part. She didn't want to confront him just yet. No, she would let him think everything was fine for a while longer. Let him enjoy the calm before the storm. Lucas had been avoiding the issue as expected. He hadn't spoken about the affair again, but Emily could see the tension in his face. The guilt, the fear of being caught, was obvious. But Emily had other plans. Plans that would make sure he never forgot what he had done. She had given him a part of herself, quite literally. Now it was time to take something from him. But she wasn't sure how yet. The thought had been festering in her mind since the moment she'd uncovered the truth. She wanted revenge, but she needed it to be precise. Something that would make Lucas understand the full extent of his betrayal. Something that would take away the very essence of what he had taken from her. It wasn't until that night, when Lucas was out for a brief errand, that Emily's decision was made. She had gone into their bedroom and locked the door. She would not be passive anymore. The time for pretending was over. Lucas had taken from her. Now it was her turn to make him feel the full weight of his betrayal. It was a cold, restless night in Wilmington, the kind of evening when the streets seemed eerily quiet, and the weight of the world felt heavy in the air. Emily sat in the dimly lit kitchen, her hands trembling as she held a glass of water that she hadn't yet touched. The silence of the house was oppressive, the ticking of the old kitchen clock, the only sound breaking through the tension. She was deep in thought, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had thought long and hard about what she was going to do. The discovery of Lucas's affair had shattered her, but she was no longer interested in the luxury of pity or forgiveness. There was no way back now. Her emotions, rage, hurt, betrayal, had all collided into one overpowering desire: to make Lucas pay for what he had done. The idea had come to her after she spent another day combing through the emails and messages. There was no escape from the truth. Lucas's betrayal was too deep, too calculated. And while Emily had been nothing but devoted to him, he had been sneaking behind her back, planning a life with someone else. She had sacrificed her health, her well-being, and now her very sense of identity. He had to feel the same devastation that she felt. The thought made her stomach churn. But she knew she couldn't act in haste. Emily was no longer the naive woman who had married Lucas. She had transformed into someone else, someone capable of making a calculated decision, someone who would make him regret every moment of their life together. It was time to break him. That night, she waited for him to return. Lucas had been gone for about an hour, which gave Emily enough time to gather her thoughts and prepare. She walked through the house with a sense of purpose, methodical in her movements, like a predator sizing up her prey. She had a plan, and it was going to be executed perfectly. There was no room for error. When Lucas finally returned, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor, Emily was waiting for him in the living room. He looked tired but not worried, a bit too comfortable for someone who had been caught in a web of lies. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice flat. He didn't sound surprised to see her up. "What's going on?" Emily didn't speak at first. She simply stared at him, her gaze cold and unblinking. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, but now, with him standing in front of her, the words seemed inadequate. Everything felt so small, so irrelevant compared to the anger and betrayal that surged through her veins. Lucas was still oblivious, the mask of indifference he wore betraying no sense of guilt. He had no idea what Emily had uncovered. No idea that his life, his marriage, was hanging by a thread. "You've been busy, haven't you?" Emily finally said, her voice tight with restrained fury. Lucas frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Don't act like you don't know," Emily snapped. "I know about Sarah. I know about your affair, and I know you've been planning to leave me." Lucas's face went pale. For a moment he was silent, unable to speak, as though the words were lodged somewhere deep inside him, unwilling to come out. But Emily had no patience for his excuses anymore. She didn't need them. "You lied to me, Lucas. You lied to my face while I was recovering, while I gave you a part of me," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Lucas took a step back, his eyes darting to the door as if he was about to make a run for it. But Emily wasn't going to let him off that easy. She had already anticipated his move. "Where are you going?" Emily asked, her voice deadly calm now. "You're not going anywhere. Not until we've had this out." Lucas seemed to swallow hard, his chest rising and falling with the weight of the moment. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Emily could feel her heartbeat thumping in her chest, her adrenaline surging. She knew he would try to apologize, try to explain himself, but she was beyond the point of hearing his excuses. He had already made his choices, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. "You think I'm weak?" Emily's voice was sharper than ever. "That I'll just forgive you and let you walk away?" "No, Lucas. You've underestimated me, and now you'll see just how far I'm willing to go to make you understand what you've done." For a long moment, Lucas stood there, frozen. The weight of her words finally seemed to land on him. He opened his mouth again, his lips trembling. But this time, Emily didn't give him a chance to speak. Without warning, she moved quickly, her hand reaching for the object she had prepared earlier. A sharp, cold instrument, something she had found in the shed that afternoon. She held it out in front of her grip firm and steady. Lucas's eyes widened in horror as he took in the sight of the sharp, glistening tool. He stepped backward, his hands raised in defense. "Emily, what the hell are you? Do you know what it feels like, Lucas? To give everything and receive nothing in return?" Emily's voice was low and dangerous now, almost like a hiss. "You don't get to take everything from me and walk away unscathed. You took my trust, my love, my health, and now I'll take from you." He took another step back, his face now twisted in fear. But Emily was fast. She lunged forward, her heart pounding in her chest as the cold steel bit into the fabric of his jeans. The expression of shock and terror on Lucas's face was everything Emily had hoped for. He was finally getting a glimpse of what it felt like to be the one in pain, to be the one to lose something vital. His body jerked, and he cried out in a voice that barely sounded like his own. But Emily didn't stop. She kept her grip steady, her mind clouded with the desire for justice, for retribution. She had given him a part of herself. Now she was taking back what he had stolen. But as the blood began to pool around him, and his breath grew labored, Emily felt a cold wave of realization sweep over her. This was no longer just about the affair. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about something much darker. She stepped back, looking at him lying there, helpless and writhing. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, and for the first time, Emily felt a tinge of regret. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and somewhere deep inside, she knew there was no going back now. The storm she had unleashed was just beginning. It had been hours since Emily had left Lucas on the floor, blood slowly pooling beneath him. The weight of what had happened still sat heavy on her chest, but she knew she couldn't afford to let the guilt stop her now. The line she had crossed was irreversible, and for the first time in what felt like a long time, Emily felt a twisted sense of empowerment. She had taken control, but as the adrenaline faded, reality set in. There were consequences to her actions, and they were coming whether she was ready for them or not. Her hand trembled as she dialed 911, her finger hovering over the button as her heart raced in her chest. She could hear Lucas's gasps in the background, but she couldn't bring herself to speak, not just yet. She had to do this right. She had to be calm, collected. 911, what's your emergency? Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. My husband, he's... He's been hurt. It's bad, really bad. He's bleeding. Stay calm, ma'am. Where is your husband? Emily gave the dispatcher her address, then slowly lowered the phone, her mind racing. What had she just done? She had wanted to break Lucas, but in that moment, she realized she had hurt him in a way she couldn't undo, not even if she wanted to. And yet a part of her wasn't sure she wanted to undo it. She wanted him to suffer, to pay for the lies, for the betrayal. But now, with the blood staining the floor and his labored breaths filling the air, Emily felt the consequences of her decisions closing in. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. When the ambulance arrived, Emily stood off to the side, watching as paramedics rushed to Lucas's side. She was numb, detached from the reality of the situation, even as the officers began to arrive, their flashlights sweeping over the scene. It was all happening so fast. Lucas was unconscious by the time the paramedics stabilized him. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, one of them looked back at Emily, his eyes cold and calculating. "Ma'am, did you do this?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Emily's throat tightened, but she swallowed her fear. Number, I mean, yes, I hurt him, but I didn't mean for it to go this far. I, he, he's my husband. He's been cheating on me. I, I didn't know what else to do. The paramedic didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push. He was too focused on his job. The officers, however, were not. One of them, a seasoned investigator named Detective Samuel Harris, had already begun taking notes, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He looked at Emily with a keen gaze, as though he could see straight through her facade. "We'll need a full statement, ma'am," Detective Harris said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll also need to ask you some questions. It's important you stay here until we can figure out what exactly happened." Emily nodded, her heart pounding. She had prepared for this. The lies she would tell, that Lucas had attacked her, that she had acted in self-defense, that the injuries were not intentional. She wasn't sure if they would believe her, but she had no choice. She couldn't tell them the truth, not with the way things had escalated. As the ambulance pulled away with Lucas, Detective Harris turned to one of his colleagues. "Get the forensics team here. We'll need to collect all evidence. This doesn't look like an accident." Emily was left standing alone in the dimly lit living room, the scene of her greatest crime now being processed by the authorities. She couldn't escape the feeling that everything was unraveling, that she was trapped in a web of her own making. Hours later, Emily found herself sitting in the interrogation room of the police station. The cold metal chair beneath her felt like a punishment, and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above made her skin crawl. Detective Harris sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. He was calm, but there was an intensity to his gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. "Start from the beginning, Ms. Carter," Harris said, his pen poised above a notepad. "What happened tonight?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had rehearsed the story a dozen times, but now that she was here, it felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. If she gave the wrong answer, everything would collapse. I didn't mean for it to go that far," she began, her voice trembling. "Lucas and I have been having problems for a while now. He's been distant, and I found out—" She paused, swallowing hard. "I found out he was having an affair." Harris didn't interrupt, but Emily could feel the weight of his silence pressing on her. "I confronted him about it," she continued, her voice growing more steady. I was angry. We fought. He He grabbed me, tried to push me away, and I just, I don't know. I panicked. I grabbed something from the shelf to protect myself, and it all happened so fast." Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her closely. "So you're saying this was an act of self-defense?" Emily nodded, her throat tight. "Yes. I didn't mean to hurt him like that. It was just a reflex. He didn't let me go, and I didn't know what else to do." Harris didn't look convinced, but he didn't press her further. "All right, we'll need to verify your story. The forensics team will be looking for any evidence that might back up what you're saying. But I want you to understand something, Ms. Carter. If your story doesn't match the evidence, this will look a lot less like self-defense and a lot more like premeditated assault." The words stung, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she had made the right decision, but now there was no turning back. She had put herself in a corner, and all she could do was wait and hope that the evidence would align with her version of events. Hours stretched into the night as Detective Harris and his team conducted their investigation. Emily was left alone in the sterile room, the minutes dragging on. Every passing second felt like a lifetime. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong, that she was losing control of the situation. She kept replaying the moment in her head, the cold steel of the object in her hand, the look of shock on Lucas's face as she struck him, the way he had collapsed to the floor. She had gone too far. But what was the alternative? Letting him get away with it? Letting him walk free while she had given him everything? Number. She couldn't allow that. Just as Emily's mind began to spiral into dark thoughts, the door to the room opened and Detective Harris stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "We've found something," he said, his voice low. "Something that doesn't quite match your story." Emily's stomach dropped. She had been so careful. What had gone wrong? Harris set a photo down on the table in front of her, and her eyes locked onto the image. It was a picture of her husband, Lucas. But it wasn't just any picture. It was a photo of Lucas, alive and well, meeting with Sarah, the woman he had been having an affair with. The photo was clear, taken in broad daylight, and it had been time-stamped just a few hours before the incident. The truth was beginning to unravel, and Emily felt the weight of it crashing down on her. There was no longer any escape, and now Detective Harris was closing in on her. Detective Harris didn't need to say much. The photo of Lucas meeting with Sarah, just hours before the attack, spoke volumes. The reality of the situation hit Emily like a wave, drowning her in a sea of guilt and terror. She had lied to the police, to herself, and now it was clear that the truth was beginning to slip through the cracks. She sat there staring at the photo, the implications of her actions settling over her like a suffocating cloud. I don't know what to say," Emily murmured, her voice shaky. She reached for the photo, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. This doesn't mean anything. It's just a coincidence. Lucas and we've been having issues for a while. This affair, I didn't know about it until recently. This was the first time I saw them together. It wasn't planned." Harris leaned in slightly, his expression unchanged. "Ms. Carter, this photo was taken just hours before your husband ended up in the emergency room with life-threatening injuries. You've told us that you acted out of self-defense, that you panicked. But this photo, along with the evidence we've gathered from the crime scene, doesn't line up with your story." Emily's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the photo again. She wanted to deny everything, to tell Harris that the picture was taken out of context, that Lucas and Sarah were just friends, that there was some innocent explanation for everything. But deep down, she knew better. The evidence was piling up against her. The paramedics had already given their report, confirming the severity of Lucas's injuries, and the medical records showed signs of premeditated harm. There was no way out now. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together a defense. She had already gone too far in her lie, but if she could just hold out, maybe she could find a way to shift the focus back onto Lucas, make them believe he had done something to provoke her. She had to hold it together. She couldn't afford to crumble now. But as she opened her mouth to speak, she realized the words wouldn't come. There was no more excuse she could offer, no more justification. Detective Harris was too sharp, too focused on the truth. It was only a matter of time before the walls closed in. "Your story is falling apart, Ms. Carter," Harris said, his voice cold but not unkind. "You've told us that Lucas attacked you, that you were acting in self-defense, but your story doesn't match the evidence we've gathered. We know Lucas and Sarah were meeting up just before the attack, and we've spoken to several people who can confirm that the two of them have been involved for quite some time. That's not something you just find out overnight. So I'm asking you, again, what really happened?" Emily was silent for a long moment, her mind struggling to find a way out of the mess she had created. She could feel the weight of Harris's gaze on her, feel the pressure building as the minutes ticked by. But the truth was inescapable. She had crossed a line, and now there was no way to undo it. Finally, her shoulders slumped and she let out a shaky breath. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I didn't plan it. But when I found out about Sarah, when I saw them together, I just, I just snapped. Harris's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He was waiting, letting her continue. I thought if I confronted him, if I just made him understand how much he had hurt me, maybe I could fix things. Emily continued, her voice quieter now. I loved him, detective. I loved him more than anything. But he lied to me. He made me feel like I wasn't enough, and I just couldn't take it anymore. When I saw him with her, when I saw the two of them together, laughing, I lost it. I wanted him to feel the pain I felt. I wanted him to hurt like I had hurt. And when I grabbed the tool, I wasn't thinking straight. It was like I was outside my own body, watching myself do it, but I couldn't stop. Her voice cracked as she spoke the last words, and she could feel the tears threatening to spill over. The floodgates of her emotions were finally opening, and for the first time, Emily allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had done. The guilt, the shame, the devastation. Everything was crashing down on her all at once. I didn't mean for him to die, Emily whispered, her face contorting in anguish. I didn't mean to hurt him that badly. I just, I wanted him to understand, to feel the pain of losing everything. Detective Harris studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. He didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice was softer than before. I believe you, Emily. I think you truly didn't mean for this to happen. But the reality is the situation spiraled out of control, and now Lucas is fighting for his life. And you're going to have to face the consequences of what you've done. Emily nodded numbly, the weight of his words sinking in. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and now she had to pay the price. But deep down, there was a part of her that couldn't bring herself to regret what she had done. Lucas had betrayed her, shattered her trust, and nothing would ever be the same again. She had taken control of her own fate, and even if it meant losing everything, she couldn't help but feel that it was a small price to pay for the sense of power she had reclaimed. I understand, she whispered. Harris stood up slowly, his expression still guarded. We'll need you to come with us, Emily. You'll have to give a full statement to the DA. They'll determine the charges based on everything we've gathered. Emily stood up as well, her legs unsteady beneath her. She had no strength left, no fight. She was a shell of the woman she had once been, and now she had to face the consequences of her actions. As she was escorted out of the interrogation room and into the holding area, she glanced back at Harris, her mind still reeling from the confession she had just made. But the storm was far from over. The investigation was just beginning, and Emily knew that no matter what happened, nothing would ever be the same again. She had started this journey with the intent to hurt Lucas, but now she had come to realize that the true cost of revenge was far greater than she could have ever imagined. Emily sat in the sterile holding cell, her body slumped on the cold metal bench. Her hands were still shaking, and her head ached from the emotional toll of the last several hours. She had spoken to Detective Harris, confessed to what she had done, and yet the gnawing sense of dread refused to leave her. The walls of the cell felt like they were closing in, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was unraveling faster than she could keep up with it. It wasn't just the consequences she was afraid of. It was the realization that the damage she had done went far beyond Lucas. The act of violence, the betrayal, and the lies. They had all left their mark on everything, on everyone. And now it seemed like it was only a matter of time before the truth came out in full force. The door to the cell opened abruptly, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. She looked up, half expecting another officer or investigator, but instead it was Lucas. He was standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot, and a bandage wrapped around his neck. The sight of him sent a jolt of panic through her. She had expected to see him lying unconscious in a hospital bed, not standing here, confronting her. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice cracking as she stood up. "Don't!" Lucas's voice was rough, strained. He took a few steps toward her, his gaze intense, like a man on the edge of something dark. "Don't try to apologize. Don't give me any more excuses. What the hell did you do to me, Emily?" His words stung, but Emily couldn't bring herself to look away. She couldn't hide from the consequences anymore. She had done this to him, and now he was here, standing in front of her, angry and hurt. There was no more pretending. There was no way to undo the damage she had caused. I, I'm so sorry, Lucas, Emily said, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just so angry. You don't understand. I was hurting too. Lucas's laugh was bitter. Hurting? You think I don't know what it feels like to be hurt, Emily? You think I don't know what it's like to feel betrayed? He took a step closer, his eyes blazing. You think that's an excuse for what you did to me? You're damn lucky you didn't kill me. The anger in his voice stung like acid, but Emily didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to anymore. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the reality of them. I didn't want to kill you, she whispered, her voice small. I just wanted you to feel what I felt. The betrayal, the humiliation. You made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I was invisible. Lucas's eyes darkened as he took another step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. And that was your response? To try and castrate me? You don't even know what you did, Emily. You took something from me that I can never get back. You took my dignity. My future Emily felt a sharp pang in her chest at his words, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. She had done this. She had taken something from him, but what she had taken from herself was far worse. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, the guilt settling in like a weight on her chest. But I couldn't stand the thought of you betraying me, of you leaving me for her. You hurt me, Lucas. You didn't even think about how much I loved you. Lucas's expression hardened, and he let out a shaky breath. Love? You call that love? You were willing to destroy me because you couldn't handle the fact that I was moving on. You took a piece of me, Emily, and now I'm left with nothing. A long silence fell between them. Emily couldn't speak. What could she say? What was there left to say? Then Lucas's voice cut through the silence, low and dangerous. I'm done with you. I don't know what your idea of love is, but this is over. I'm done trying to fix something that's already broken. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She felt as if the ground beneath her was giving way. She had already lost him once, when she found out about the affair. But now, with him standing in front of her, looking at her with disdain, she realized she had lost him for good. She had burned every bridge, destroyed everything they had built together. For a moment, Emily felt the urge to beg him to stay, to plead for forgiveness, but she knew deep down it was pointless. Lucas had been her everything, but now he was nothing. She had pushed him too far, and now he was walking away. I'll sign whatever I have to sign. I'll take the fall for what I did, Emily said quietly, the words barely a whisper. But please don't make me face the truth alone. Please don't leave me in this prison of my own making. Lucas's eyes softened for just a moment, but then his face hardened again. You've already left me, Emily. You left me the moment you chose to hurt me instead of talking to me. You don't get to pretend you didn't make this choice. With that, he turned and walked out of the holding cell, leaving Emily standing there, alone. She collapsed onto the bench, her head spinning. What had she done? She had thought she could control the situation, that her anger could somehow make everything right. But now everything was broken. There was no coming back from this. Her heart ached as she realized that Lucas wasn't just walking away from her. He was walking away from everything they had ever been. Every moment, every laugh, every shared dream. He was gone. But what hurt even more was the crushing realization that Emily had never truly known him. Not like she thought she did. He wasn't the man she had loved. He had lied, betrayed her, and in the end, it was her own need for revenge that had shattered everything. And now all she had left was the hollow weight of regret. As the days passed, the investigation into the attack on Lucas continued. The police were piecing together the details, and while Emily's confession had been pivotal, there were still unanswered questions. Detective Harris had his suspicions, but he needed more evidence. He needed to make sure everything lined up before he moved forward with charges. And in the quiet, lonely moments of her confinement, Emily found herself waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the truth to come crashing down, for the court system to decide her fate. But through it all, there was one thing she knew for sure. Everything she had once known, everything she had once believed in, had been torn apart. And no matter the outcome of the investigation, Emily knew that the woman who walked out of this prison would not be the same woman who had walked in. The woman she had been, the one who had loved and trusted Lucas, was gone forever. And what remained was just a shell, a shadow of the woman who had made the ultimate mistake. The days following the confrontation with Lucas were like a blur for Emily. She had given her statement to the police, confessed to her part in the attack, and now all she could do was wait. Her lawyer had advised her to remain silent, to keep her head down and let the legal process play out. But there was no quiet in her mind. The events that had unfolded, the betrayal, the violence, the spiraling descent, kept playing on a loop in her thoughts, reminding her of the irreversible damage she had caused. She knew that the charges against her would be serious. The attack had been brutal. Lucas had nearly died, and the physical and emotional toll of his injuries were only beginning to surface. But beyond the legal ramifications, it was the personal consequences that gnawed at her. Lucas was gone from her life, perhaps forever, and she couldn't shake the image of him standing in the doorway of her cell, the hurt in his eyes, the finality in his voice. But just as she thought she was coming to terms with her fate, the case took another turn. Detective Harris, who had been keeping an eye on the situation from a distance, called Emily in for one last meeting. The small interrogation room felt suffocating as Emily sat across from Harris, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't seen him since the confession, but his presence now seemed even more imposing than before. His piercing gaze, the way he studied her, made it feel as though he could see right through her, past the layers of guilt and fear. "Ms. Carter," Harris began, his voice calm but firm, "I need you to understand that everything we've gathered up until now, the evidence, your statements, has led us to one conclusion. But there's more. There's something else we've uncovered, something we didn't expect." Emily felt her stomach tighten. She had no idea what he was referring to, but she could feel the tension in the room rise. Harris had never been one to waste words, and the seriousness in his tone made her anxious. "What? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harris leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "You're not the only one who has been keeping secrets, Emily. Your husband, Lucas, he wasn't just having an affair with Sarah. We've uncovered evidence that suggests there were other women, other people involved in this whole mess." Emily's eyes widened in shock, but she quickly covered it up with a shaky breath. "What are you talking about?" "Lucas. Lucas was with Sarah, and I didn't know about anyone else." Harris shook his head slightly as if he had expected this reaction. "The thing is, Emily, Lucas wasn't exactly forthcoming with the truth either. We found bank records, messages, and even videos. Evidence that points to a more complicated situation than you might have realized. Sarah wasn't his only lover, and we also found a connection between him and someone else, someone you might have known." The room seemed to tilt, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Emily tried to grasp the situation, but the reality was slipping away from her. "Who?" she asked, her voice low and filled with dread. Harris pulled out a file from his briefcase and placed it in front of her. He opened it slowly, revealing more pictures, more documents, and a series of messages that made Emily's heart race. There in black and white was evidence of Lucas's infidelity, messages from a woman named Jillian, a name Emily recognized but didn't fully understand. "Jillian?" Emily whispered, staring at the screen. "Who is she?" "Jillian was another of Lucas's affairs," Harris said, his tone steady but unsettling. "But here's where things get complicated. Jillian was also involved with someone very close to you, Emily. Someone you trusted." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She stared at Harris, struggling to make sense of what he was saying. "What are you talking about? Who could possibly be involved in all of this?" Harris took a deep breath, then uttered a name that made Emily's blood run cold. "Your sister," he said. "Megan." She's been involved with Lucas for over a year now. The room spun. Emily felt her entire world tilt on its axis. Her mind refused to accept the words that had just left Harris's mouth. Megan? Her own sister? It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Megan? She gasped, almost choking on the word. No, no, that's impossible. She's my sister, Harris. She would never. But Harris wasn't finished. I'm afraid it's true. We have phone records, emails, and even photos. Megan and Lucas had a secret relationship, and from the looks of it, she wasn't just a passive participant. She was deeply involved, manipulating things behind your back. The betrayal hit harder than anything she had ever felt before. Her mind couldn't process it. The world around her seemed to blur as she tried to make sense of what had just been revealed. Megan had been involved with Lucas, her own sister. How had she not known? How had Megan hidden this from her, let alone become so deeply enmeshed in the web of lies and deceit? Emily couldn't breathe. The anger, the betrayal, the sense of total helplessness overwhelmed her. Her entire life had been a lie. She had been so consumed with Lucas's betrayal that she hadn't even considered the possibility that someone so close to her would be capable of such treachery. Emily, I know this is a lot to take in, Harris said gently, as if trying to soften the blow. But this changes everything. This wasn't just about you and Lucas. It's about a whole web of deceit that's been building for a long time. And now, it's all coming to light. Emily's head throbbed and her hands began to shake uncontrollably. No, this can't be true. Megan wouldn't do this. She wouldn't. Emily, Harris interrupted softly. We have the evidence. We've been investigating this for weeks. Your sister's involvement is undeniable. For the first time since she had entered the interrogation room, Emily's eyes filled with tears. She felt the full weight of the betrayal sink in, and the pain was unbearable. Not only had she lost Lucas, but now she was losing Megan too. The person she had trusted most, the one she had relied on through thick and thin, had stabbed her in the back in the most unimaginable way. Why? Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Why would she do this to me? Harris's face softened, but his expression remained serious. That's something you'll have to ask her, Emily. But the truth is, you're not alone in this. The investigation is far from over.